Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the public-private sector presentation. My name is Anthony Mulinge. I'm the Managing Director for Fresh Life, and it's an absolute pleasure for me to be here with you this afternoon. Yesterday, when we started the presentation, and they said that 50% of the people coming for this World Water Week are new, I realized I was actually in. The reason is because I've spent the last 20 years in the FMCG sector, and I've just been in the wash sector for the last 5 months. So anything that I say cannot be held and used against me, but I have enough experience to want to apply everything that I've learned in this particular sector. Before I proceed, I just wanted to recognize the partners that we will be handling this session together with. So starting with NWASCO, we also have Kampala Capital City Authority, we have Green Cape, we have KIWASCO, eThekwini, CBSA, WhatsApp, and Aquaya. And during the course of the presentation, you will get to listen to them as they make their presentations, and also in the panel discussions that we're going to have later on. So why PPPs? One of the challenges that we face as a country and as a continent in Africa is that the government has the mandate to provide sanitation solutions to the communities. But unfortunately, either because of resources or because of expertise, they're not able to do this on their own. And that is where the private sector comes in. When you look at the challenges in terms of innovation, when it comes to how cost-effective the solutions we can provide, bringing in a business acumen, that is what the private sector delivers together with the public to be able to give citywide inclusive sanitation. And the reason we want to have this session is to look and see how far we can be able to partner together, both as public and private sectors, to be able to provide the citywide inclusive sanitation to the farthest and the most difficult communities to reach. Why Fresh Life? So Fresh Life provides what we call container-based sanitation to the informal settlements across cities in Kenya. And we've also in the process of expanding to the rest of the continent, into Kampala, into Lusaka, looking for the private sector that will be interested in doing this. We currently provide over 4,500 toilets in Kenya alone, covering almost 170,000 different people. And in the sanitation value chain, what we handle is the containment, the emptying, and the transport, and then safe treatment of the waste that we collect. So we believe that partnering together with the public sector, we should be able to provide this solution to the non-sewered areas, as well as guarantee the safe treatment of that particular waste. In terms of what we have done with the public sector, we will be having a session today, and we'll get an opportunity to listen to Tom, as well as a large panel, in terms of how we've been able to partner with KIWASCO in Kisumu in Kenya to be able to provide this partnership that has expanded the services that we offer in those communities. So I will not steal away the thunder that Joanne and Tom are going to present, just to acknowledge that we will have a session where we can speak in terms of how this has worked, and any questions that you have, we'll be able to address them at that particular time. So the session agenda is as follows. Shortly after me, we'll get an opportunity to listen to Sam and Omar, who will be dialing in from Mozambique, from WhatsApp. We'll also get learnings from Rachel at Aquaya. And after that, Remy from CBSA will be able to take us through the learnings from that particular partnership. Then after that, we will transition into a panel which will be moderated by Joanne, and she'll get an opportunity to invite all our partners that will be participating in this session. So without further ado, I'll invite Sam to take it from here.
Great. Okay, thank you, Anthony. I think I need to use this mic. So my name's Sam Jabble. I'm Head of Evaluation, Research and Learning with WhatsApp. I'm going to give a rapid tour of some lessons that are derived from WhatsApp programs over time. Then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Omar, who's going to talk about how we're applying those lessons right now in Mozambique, where we're supporting a new PPP for FSM services. So briefly, context on WhatsApp's perspective on PPPs. So our entry point is always the mandated authority. That is to say, the institution that is responsible for providing water and sanitation services citywide, including to low-income areas. So we seek to build long-term partnerships with those authorities, but we also believe very strongly that the private sector has a critical role to play in supporting the mandated authority to execute and to provide services. And our perspective on this has actually evolved somewhat over time. So if we look back around 10 years or so ago, we were more involved in providing direct business support to SMEs, but we realized quite quickly that there is a real ceiling on the growth that can be delivered without addressing wider systemic issues such as financing, regulation, institutional capacity. So over time, we've focused increasingly on addressing some of those systemic barriers to business growth to unlock private sector participation while still providing support to businesses where needed. So 3 lessons that we wanted to introduce into this discussion. The first is based on the evidence base, and we think that these findings really need to be kept front of mind as we move through the session. This lesson is that the financing gap between what low-income customers are willing to pay for sanitation and the true cost of services is vast. We know this because we commissioned a 3-country study called SanCost, which was looking at the specific costs of sanitation services in specific cities, how much the low-income residents were willing to pay for those options in those cities. This was conducted by Aquaya, and the findings were really striking. The headline may not be striking, but actually the scale of the gap is even larger than we might imagine. So there's a clear implication that follows from that, which is we need public investment, we need smart subsidies, we need to find ways to incentivize the private sector to serve the poorest. So that leads us on to the second point. How can we incentivize the private sector to serve the poorest? In our experience, public-private partnerships can be immensely valuable because the guarantee of public sector support, the conditionality that can be baked into PPPs can be used to leverage, to incentivize equitable service delivery. And let me give one example of that, which is from Bangladesh, where we've supported SWEEP. So this is a public-private partnership that has been now rolled out in multiple urban centres in Bangladesh. This is essentially a lease-based arrangement. So the mandated authority leases an asset, the vacuum tanker, to the private sector partner, but that is conditional on the private sector partner meeting certain contractual requirements. In order to have access to that asset, they need to serve a minimum proportion of customers from low-income communities. There are challenges in enforcing that, and I don't want to gloss over those, but we think this is a really effective mechanism, and it's supported by a differential pricing strategy. So within this model, high-income customers pay a higher tariff, lower-income customers pay a reduced tariff. That enables the private sector partner to generate profit, and all of the SWEEP private sector partners are generating profit, whilst also building in equity into the business model. And then the final lesson we wanted to draw on is regulation, which is fundamental. We've seen this across our programs. I'll give one example from Kenya in a moment, but essentially we're talking here about raising standards, bringing, for example, manual emptiers and informal emptiers into the fold through the development and enforcement of guidelines, licensing, service provider certification. One location where WhatsApp and other actors have been supporting this is Kisumu in Kenya. So Gasia Power is a pit emptying business that we've supported. And critical to their evolution has been the development of standard operating procedures to formalise pit emptying services in Kisumu. So that's involved Kisumu County and KIWASCO on the public sector side, positioning and in creating the enabling environment for Gasia Power to move forward as a business. Okay, those are 3 lessons. Now I want to hand over to my colleague Omar, who's going to talk about how we're applying those in Maputo.
Okay. Thank you, Sam. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Omar Khan, and I'm the sanitation lead for WhatsApp Mozambique. And I'll be talking about the application of these lessons in Maputo City. I don't know if you see the slides on the screen.
Not yet, Omar. Are we able to get the slides up? Yes, we can see it now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So as Sam mentioned, WhatsApp's entry point is the mandated authority. So in Maputo, we are working closely with the Maputo municipality to replicate the SWEEP model for latrine and septic tank emptying. This PPP will be based also on a leasing agreement, aiming at mitigating risks for private investment. The scheme in this slide that you see here describes how the PPP works. So starting from the left side, we have WhatsApp as the funding partner who is providing the capital to acquire and adapt equipment for this FSM service. So ownership of the equipment will be given to the municipality of Maputo, who through a PPP agreement will allow use of this equipment to a local private operator, which is this gray dot in the middle. As part of the agreement, the private operator will be required to complete a relatively small percentage of their emptying service for low-income households at a reduced price, cross-subsidizing from jobs completed with customers from other parts of the city. Also, as part of this agreement, the private operator will be charged a reduced fee to dump the waste safely at a local treatment plant. The agreement also stipulates that the municipality will be responsible for demand generation in these low-income communities. So a third-party marketing firm has been hired to provide support for this. So we expect that with more of these types of PPPs, safe sanitation services can reach further into these low-income communities in Maputo. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as per lesson 3 that Sam mentioned, regulation is fundamental to raise service standards by ensuring accountability by the mandated authorities. So in Mozambique, we are making an effort to contribute to an effective regulation by working with the national water regulator, which is AURA, it's a public institution, and also with the service providers, which are the municipalities, sometimes represented by their autonomous sanitation services. And it has been a long and challenging journey since we started the collaboration. Firstly, we supported to prepare the regulatory frameworks for sanitation services, which only recently have been signed in a few cities, including Maputo. And at the moment, we are working both with AURA and these service providers in the operationalization of these regulatory frameworks. It's one aspect that is important to mention is that these regulatory frameworks will include some proper KPIs to ensure inclusion of the low-income communities, and there's also one sub-indicator encouraging the creation of PPPs for FSM services. These regulatory frameworks also provide a small contribution in terms of bridging the financing gap by supporting the introduction of the sanitation tariffs, with revenues that are expected to be ring-fenced for improvements of sanitation services. So that's it regarding the work developed by WhatsApp in Mozambique. Thank you for your attention, everyone, and over to you again, Sam.
That is a reality that can't be ignored.
which I'll talk about in a minute, who coordinated with service providers to provide pit emptying services for pit latrines. And this was in collaboration with Kisumu Water, KIWASCO, who waived the dumping fees for at the fecal sludge treatment facility. And as part of this, we were providing cash incentives to see if we removed the financial barrier, what was the uptake of safe emptying services. And the three managing groups that we looked at were the Association of Vacuum Truck Operators, VUCASASA, which is a formalized pit emptying group similar to GCCA that Sam mentioned earlier, Nyalenda Water, which is a delegated management model, small-scale water provider. So for these three different groups, we had different geographical areas of Kisumu that they were responsible for, and they were also responsible for contacting customers, marketing, and coordinating services. So what we found was that the Association of VTOs emptied the most sludge, charged the least, and had the highest customer satisfaction. So I'm not going to go through all the numbers here, but here this is looking at the volume of sludge emptied over the study, and it was about a 3-month period. You can see the association emptied the most, and just overall they were also making the most money, even though they charged less per job. So they charged about half the price. And one really interesting, I'll move on to my last slide just because I know we're tight on time here. But one really interesting thing that we found was that subsidies were effective at increasing the demand for safe emptying services. So cost was really one of the key barriers for safe emptying services. We also found that the private sector, these different managing groups, can serve as a switchboard between households and suppliers, addressing that second barrier of connecting suppliers and providers. And the third thing, which is maybe, in my mind, one of the most interesting, is that the vacuum trucks were effectively servicing low-income areas, and were able to delegate the unserviceable jobs to formal emptiers. So prior to the study, and in some contexts, there's the perception that vacuum trucks cannot service low-income areas because they can't get into slums, or they can't empty pit latrines with solid waste. And that was the case in some of the pit latrines, but most they were able to service in Kisumu. And then the last thing that I want to mention is that expanding safe pit emptying services requires expanding capacity for fecal waste treatment, of course. And I know we're going to hear from some of our partners in KIWASCO later as part of the panel. So that was a very rapid fire presentation, but that's all I have. So thank you very much. Sorry, I did forget to thank everyone that we worked with, so I'll just leave that up there and move on so much. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Hello, it's very nice to see you all in the sanitation room here at the conference. It's a bit tight, it's great. I'm Remy, I'm the Executive Director of the CBS Alliance, so the Alliance of Container Based Sanitation Providers. I'm going to talk about how PPPs can work for CBS. And so starting with why CBS is really cool, of course, and how PPPs can work, can enable it. And starting with, we want to provide sanitation to the 1 billion people who live in informal settlements, in very dense, low-income, informal and planned areas. So the good news is that historically, it is possible. All you need to do is to invest in housing. If you improve housing on related amenities for only $20,000 per household, roughly, you can provide sanitation here. The bad news is that in this room, I don't think many of you have $20,000 per household to provide for housing. And until about a decade ago, there wasn't really a good solution apart from public or community toilets to reach there. Because most of the usual solutions involve digging, sewers, septic tanks, pits, etc. If you can dig, why not? But digging is often not possible because of density, because of lack of tenure. So if you start to do it, it kind of formalizes the area, and many politicians don't like that at all, not including flooding, groundwater, etc. The good news is that about a decade ago, or a bit more, a few enterprises and NGOs came with a great idea, which is container-based sanitation. If you're going to say, Remy, of course you say this, you're the director of the CBS Alliance. Well, I got the job because I like CBS, not the other way around. But at the base, you've heard from Fresh Life, a service where you don't need to dig. You can just have a small container that gets your daily production and that is removed regularly, safely, very importantly. The CBS Alliance has 10 members, so you've heard from Fresh Life by Sanergy in Kenya. In the room, I think we also have Sanivation, Andrew at the back, and Sasha from Soil in Haiti, but here are all the members of the Alliance. They all have different technologies, different models, and that's really, really interesting. The reason I like it is because CBS is great when you don't have a lot of water, when you have too much water, when you want to make good things out of poo, to sell it, to get carbon offsets out of it, etc., and when you don't have a lot of space, like in the settlements that we've seen. So they can be put in homes. And also, I love WhatsApp. They do the best studies with Aquaya. Sorry. WhatsApp did a study with Clean Team in Ghana to look at user satisfaction using the sanitation quality of life framework, which looks at evaluating how users perceive their sanitation solution along 5 dimensions. You know, the things that we say really, really matter for sanitation. You know, disgust, health, safety, shame. We don't talk about it, but you can actually measure it. And what they measured is that from the previous sanitation solution in red to the Clean Team in blue, there was a big improvement. And in fact, the Clean Team solution, the CBS solution, scored almost top scores everywhere. The improvement was even more marked for women. So the big question, you're all thinking, this is great. We've got a solution that can reach people in very hard areas, that people really like, that is appropriate for in case of flood, that is resilient. So why is it not everywhere? Thank you for thinking this so loudly. There's 2 reasons. One is money, and the other is policies. On the money side, I like to say that CBS has been a great experiment to see what if you try to provide the full sanitation chain in one go and make users pay for it. So as WhatsApp has uncovered, affordability and willingness to pay is much lower than what sanitation actually costs. You found about 20%, people say they are willing to pay 25% of the cost, and in reality are only really ready to pay 11%, if I remember correctly. That's about right. User fees and even selling of products cannot cover the full sanitation chain. It's impossible. In high-income countries, in a few high-income countries, sanitation fees, the surcharge on the water bills, covers OPEX. Yeah, tiny bit of CAPEX. We have to stop pretending that it's possible elsewhere. If you want to reach low-income customers, you have to put massive amounts of money in it regularly. There's no way around it. On the policy side, CBS is not always known or accepted apart in a few countries. This is changing rapidly, and we have seen great progress in Kenya, thanks to the work of the CBS operators and their partners there. So that's been really, really encouraging. And these 2 things come together in procurement, in contracting. So let's have a look. I believe this can change. So if you look at the spectrum, this was supposed to be animated, sorry. If we look at the spectrum of how public authorities, please don't take photos, this is embarrassing, this is just my brain dump. It's not formally done like WhatsApp or Aquaya do. But how public authorities can do sanitation, they can be unaware of what exists. This settlement doesn't even exist, it's not on a map. Well, this informal pit emptiers, at least they get the pits empty, that's great. Yes, you can operate there, and you can even pay us a small fee for the privilege to do that. Wow, we really like your model. Maybe we should contract you for a couple of years to do this. And, well, we like that model so much, we are going to have a 30-year contract and concession for you, etc. Very roughly. And along with possible finance contracting mechanisms in there, from the very long-term design, build, operate, concessions, etc., service contracts, and in the middle, sort of 5-10-year horizon of delegated management. So, I'm arguing that this was really supposed to be animated. Sorry about that. Ignore the bottom. I want to contrast a bit how sanitation is typically contracted and how it can change, and how it is already changing thanks to better regulatory frameworks, thanks to better regulation. We've got people who are going to talk about it in a panel that's very exciting. Typically, you have a different contract for subsidizing toilets or pits, one for emptying services and transport, one for treatment and reuse. As an authority, you don't have a full grasp of the whole cost of the sanitation chain. You have different contracts to manage, often from different authorities, actually. With CBS, for example, you can have a single contract. You can have a lot of efficiency gains on a full view of the cost of the chain. I'm going to skip because I can see the time running, but I'm going to leave you with two ways that I think we can think differently. And this will be, we've seen great examples of this. We're going to hear even more in a panel in a minute. One of them is to shift what is a measure of success in sanitation. For politicians, they often open a treatment plant, secure a big contract, open it, job's done. The problem is that, well, it doesn't solve our problem, but also, if you're a minister, very often it will open after you are out of office. It's not good for you, come on. Instead, a measure of success can be, can you serve a whole area safely, especially a low-income area, an area where it's impossible. And it is possible with container-based sanitation, of course, if that's the appropriate option for that area. But more broadly, with a portfolio of solutions. I would like to argue that user satisfaction and affordability should be key criteria for your providers. Can they provide an affordable service that users actually like? This is extremely important because otherwise you only find out that people don't like the toilets or the emptying service after, when numbers go down, slippage, etc. This should be baked in any contract. And I would like to argue that we should use a medium-term horizon for serving informal settlements. I'm saying 10-year horizon, let's be ambitious. Much more than the 1 or 2 year service contract that we see very commonly, but much less than the 30-year very cumbersome concessions that we would otherwise see for bigger plants. The question is, can you serve all your residents safely now, very soon? It is possible. Many providers and many are in the room have shown that it's possible. Your residents are going to expect it, so you may as well get started and do it now. Thank you very much.
Wow, it's extremely difficult to go after such a wonderful orator like Remy. I'd like to introduce our panelists to come and sit here. Then we can begin the session. Once again, thank you all for joining this session. It's a great honor to see the room that's full. I'll quickly begin by introducing our panelists. We can start from that end. You can tell us your name, your organization, as well as what your experience has been working with PPPs in your sector.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Peter Mtale. I'm the Chief Inspector for the National Water Supply and Sanitation Council, NWASCO, which is the regulator for the provision of water supply and sanitation services in Zambia. Maybe coming to issues of PPPs, let me mention that we license all the water commercial utilities in Zambia. And whoever wants to provide services, whether water or sanitation, should work under these commercial utilities. But of course, before they do that, we have what we call permitting requirements, which the commercial utilities have to look at and ensure that this private operator or a community-based organization is fit for purpose. Then they'll write to a regulator to say, want to engage this private operator or community-based organization. And once we give consent, then they'll sign some agreement, which is like a performance contract. And this has been happening for some time now. I think we have about 4 commercial utilities that have engaged private operators to do the fecal sludge management services on their behalf. So maybe as we move on, I may just maybe shed more light in terms of the kind of PPPs that are there. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Thomas Odongo. I'm the Managing Director, Kisumu Water and Sanitation Company. Based around Lake Victoria, is the 3rd largest city in Kenya. Our experience with PPPs started around 2017, 2018, and we've entered into partnerships across the whole sanitation service chain. We have partnerships in in containment, pit emptying, transport. We also have partnerships in treatment. We are aggressively looking for partners in reuse. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Devin Govender. I'm the Senior Manager of Commercial and Business for the eThekwini Water and Sanitation. eThekwini Water and Sanitation belongs to the eThekwini municipality, which is located in Durban on the east coast of South Africa. Just a quick snapshot, we have a population of approximately 3.8 million people. We're one of the fastest growing cities in South Africa, and we're home to one of the busiest ports. So basically, my department is responsible for implementing PPPs within the water and sanitation sector. So we have a number of PPPs that have been registered with our national treasury. So in South Africa, we have a unit called GTAC, which is responsible for your PPPs regulating municipalities. So basically, when it comes to sanitation services, we have 4 categories that we involve with the private sector. So one being the rural sanitation. So post-apartheid, eThekwini municipality has been one of the first municipalities to roll out urine diversion toilets to rural areas where there was basically no access to water and sanitation services. So that program was very successful, and we've then since moved on to address our backlogs. Then the second category is your informal settlements. Like many of my colleagues, informal settlements is a growing concern in South Africa. And for informal settlements, we have had a number of pilots ranging from your modularized, decentralized systems for where there's no waterborne sanitation to now the most successful community ablution blocks, which I'm sure most of our colleagues will also present on. So the community ablution blocks has been a tremendous success. And it's basically exploded to the extent that we have now implemented 1,600 units across the Unicity. So it's been a great project in the sense that within the urban edge, as the informal settlements densify, we were able to inject into our trunk system and be able to control diseases and be able to provide a basic sanitation level. Our third one is where we've got low-cost housing where there's no sanitation in place, where we are currently investigating a PPP model, where we're looking at decentralized plants to be able to provide a level of service in areas where there is no EWS sanitation services. And the fourth one is the urban sanitation. So from the urban sanitation, I'm sure most of you are familiar with eThekwini's Durban Water Recycling Plant. It's one of the first and most successful public-private partnerships. It's located on the grounds of our Southern Wastewater Treatment Facility. Basically, it involves treating 47.5 megaliters per day of domestic and industrial effluent to near potable standard for industrial reuse in their processes. We have currently finished a 20-year concession contract, very successful one, and we're now embarking on a new concession contract. So the new concession contract will involve a portable water component. So now we will basically be an off-taker as a municipality as well. Just quickly in terms of the successes, because eThekwini is one of the kind of forerunners and holds a torch when it comes to PPPs. So in terms of the Durban Water Recycling Project, it's been a success model because it was a win-win situation. So from the environment, we were currently discharging through our sea outfall, so we were able to reduce our sea outfall load, reduce pollution and waste minimization. For the municipality, we were able to now direct more portable water elsewhere, and we had a peri-urban community that needed water. And most importantly, we did not have no capital funding for the construction of the plant. For the industry, it was a great access to cheap second-class water, whereas now they had lower tariffs and was basically providing them a guaranteed supply of water. For the private party, it was an attractive investment opportunity and a long-term contract. For the equity partner, because this project involved debt and equity financing, it provided a lucrative return on the investment. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claire Pengeli. I work at an organization called Green Cape. We're a bit of a different flavor to the rest of the panel. We're an independent, non-profit organization. So we're an intermediary organization that helps form some of those partnerships between the public sector and the private sector. So our fundamental goal is the growth of green businesses, specifically within the sanitation realm. We're specifically interested in sanitation provision that accelerates the circular economy. In terms of the work that we do, we have really strong networks within the business sector. We've got great relationships within the government. Specifically, we do quite a lot of work with the City of Cape Town. So when it comes to your official PPPs, we haven't done any of them, but we're very interested in promoting and exploring them and supporting the move towards them, specifically with the City of Cape Town. Thanks.
And I'm Julian Musime. I work with Kampala Capital City Authority, that is in Uganda. And Kampala is the capital city of Uganda. And I work as a program coordinator for private sector development and sanitation marketing. And Kampala Capital City Authority is a regulator, and we play a regulatory role when it comes to the PPPs. And we've been able to have several of these being enacted and coming into place. And our role in this has been mainly formalizing the sector. How can the MTS or the different players in the business be able to work in a civilized manner or in a civilized environment? And as KCCA, our role is also to provide an environment that they can actually thrive in their businesses, because you're going to find many of our private sector investors not really interested in investing in sanitation due to the low profits that come out of there. So we have to provide that environment where they'll be able to gain business out of it. As they support us in availing services to our communities, they are at the end of the day going home with something in their pockets. So as regulators, our role is mainly to provide an environment that they can actually thrive as a businesses. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, panelists. My name is Joanne Kiarie. I'm the moderator for this session. I am from Fresh Life. I'll quickly go to the first session of the panel. As regards regulation and PPPs, you find that there are two challenges. One of them is there lacks regulation, especially in the sanitation space, and sometimes there's over-regulation. My first question goes to NWASCO. How does the regulatory and institutional framework work, and how does it support PPPs, and what do you feel like can change to increase the support to the private sector?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much once again. Let me start by saying that in Zambia, we do have the PPP Act of 2019, number 14, which provides the broader framework in terms of PPPs. But also just to mention that constitutionally in our country, the local authorities are mandated to provide water supply and sanitation services, but they have delegated this mandate to the commercial utilities. I talked about commercial utilities. So with that, then we also have the Water Supply and Sanitation Act. So if you go to our section 9 of the Water Supply and Sanitation Act, it clearly states that private sector can participate in the provision of water supply and sanitation services through joint ventures or shares. So you can, partner, or you can push in shares. So our Water Supply and Sanitation Act actually clearly states that. So the environment for PPPs actually is quite enabling. That's what I can start with. Now, when it comes to us as a regulator, we are like a referee. And as I said, at the moment, we are just issuing licenses to commercial utilities. So whoever wants to participate in the provision of on-site sanitation services, water supply, would work under that commercial utility. So what we do is that according to our license conditions, before you engage a third party, you are supposed to get consent from the regulator. So we have developed what we call permitting requirements, because what we want to see is that before any service provider is engaged, this service provider should be fit for purpose. So they will be ticked against the permitting requirements. So once the commercial utility is satisfied, then they will write to us to say, I want to engage this particular service provider. They bring to us, we scrutinize and give consent. Then they'll go ahead and sign a management service contract, a lease. It could be a service contract or any other contract which is PPP. Now, for us as a regulator, we need to make sure that all the regulatory rules are followed. So we do delegate this regulatory function to the commercial utilities. Once there is a problem, we don't go to the private operator or a community-based organization. We go to this licensed utility to say, why is it happening this way? But also when it comes to issues of tariffs, if we see that this private operator needs a favorable tariff, we'll come in and ensure that the tariff is given, of course, with justified costs. And then also the other issue is that when there are conflicts, we come in as an arbitrator, because, contracts have to be enforced. If they're not enforced, then that becomes a problem. So we have seen a number of commercial utilities that have signed these partnerships. Lusaka Water also overall is being shown by some. That is Lusaka Water. So they have caught about 6 private operators for pit latrine emptiers. Just that. And then you have also other commercial utilities that have gone into this. We'll see actually more coming, because now we are engaging the vacuum tankers to make sure they also get into PPPs. So basically, that's what we see. But maybe going forward, what we need to see is that we do have a specific framework for PPPs specific to the water sector. You know, the peculiarities of the water sector, we cannot base it on the overall PPP policy, but bring it down, customize it so that we quicken the process of engaging these private operators. So I think for us going forward, that's what we are looking at, and probably before end of this year, we should have the PPP framework in place. Thank you.
That. Julian, I would like to kind of know what the work that you did regarding the Kampala Sewerage and Fecal Sludge Management Ordinance. What gap were you trying to fill when you were developing the ordinance, and how has it resolved these gaps, and why did you feel a local regulatory framework was necessary?
Thank you very much for that. And Kampala is a fast-growing city, and it's of course under the national guidance in terms of policies. We have different national policies that are in place, and one of them is the sanitation policy. However, the weak framework, the weak regulatory framework within the different existing policies forced us to go into something else, into coming up with something that will actually enforce the existing legal or regulatory frameworks that we have in place. And that's when we came up with the ordinances, the fecal sludge and sewerage ordinance that we currently have in Kampala. And this was mainly to enforce or to guide and also to support us in terms of implementation, because you're going to find, we found that most of our sanitation laws at the moment were quite weak in terms of implementation, in terms of enforcement, and these ordinances the ordinance came in handy to support us to regulate and also enforce. And we picked on also the private sector into the ordinance to see that we have it actually under the law, that the private sector should actually participate or be involved in sanitation service delivery. And we have it right now under the fecal sludge and sewerage ordinance, and our private sector is now mandated, and we're supporting them as regulators to provide services to the city. And we've also seen a lot of, through our development of the ordinance, we've seen a lot of growth and capacity development, not only for the private sector, but also for us as an institution, as an authority under the government, being something very new. It's one of its kind, the first of its kind in the country, and we're having many other cities and towns coming to learn from us. And we've seen a lot of capacity development in terms of the technical stuff, in terms of implementation of the ordinance, even to our own legal department, getting deeper into understanding exactly what is this that you're trying to bring on board. Sanitation, an ordinance in sanitation was quite something new, and getting people actually interested, and also having other policymakers actually getting on board. We have the advocacy arm of our organization that has also got interested and ready to support and enforce sanitation in the city. And we're seeing this also escalating to other towns and other cities around us as Kampala. And besides this, we're also seeing the private sector also getting motivated, because initially they were operating, but they were not sure, they were not secure, and they were also not being supported. So as Kampala, we've gone ahead to actually support them, incentivize them, and starting with the ordinance and seeing them actually being recognized at national level is one of the greatest achievements we've seen under the authority, and also seen with the private sector. And we hope that we can drive this agenda of sanitation, and we are looking at it also getting even bigger and better at national level. We want more investment in sanitation. Thank you.
Thanks for that response. The next question would go to Tom of KIWASCO. Normally, we usually see there's a lot of regulation on seaward sanitation, but when it comes to non-seaward sanitation, you find that there's little or no regulation. How do you feel that the regulation on non-seaward sanitation will improve services, as well as increasing the number of the private sector organizations in the sanitation space?
Thank you, Joanne. I do agree with you that a lot of focus has been on the seaward part of sanitation. As KIWASCO, we decided to change focus in 2018 and embrace sanitation. Reason being, we felt that we were the mandated authority for private sector entry into sanitation in the county. The way the water service provision is organized in Kenya is that the water utilities are private companies that are fully owned by the county government. So the water utilities are semi-autonomous. So we were able to make that decision as a semi-autonomous entity without necessarily, of course, getting approval from the county. Though the county government is represented in our board of directors. Now, lack of regulation in the sanitation sector, and you were seeing this before 2018, there was a lot of disorder. There were no policies, no strategies, no planning. And therefore, all the players in the sanitation service chain, everybody was doing everything for himself. For example, there was no enforcement, there was no planning, and of course, very little investment was coming into sanitation. Regulation helps, and of course, it helps a lot, because with regulation, then we are going to have service standards. So if there are service standards, then the performance of each player in sanitation is going to be measured. And of course, if performance is measured, then that will generally improve service provision in the low income areas. The other thing is that if there's no regulation, then nobody is going to invest in sanitation, and we saw that quite a lot before we changed focus in 2018. The other thing that comes with lack of regulation is that the government is not going to allocate resources for sanitation solutions. And that has been happening, and because of our change in focus to sanitation, we are seeing now a lot of improvement in terms of budgetary allocation for sanitation solutions, both at the county level, because this discussion has been escalated to the national level as well. We are also seeing a lot of interest from private sector. They are coming in, and if private sector is coming in, that means that investments are improving. We are reducing the financing gap when it comes to sanitation solutions. The other thing that regulation helps is inclusivity. With regulation, then we're going to ensure that no one is left behind. So, Joanne, those are some of the benefits that I would say that accrue when there's regulation in the sanitation service provision. Thank you.
In the same breath, my next question is for Claire. South Africa stands out as a country that guarantees water and sanitation as a constitutional right. From your experience, has this translated into working with the private sector? And secondly, is the regulation clear in terms of who holds the mandate for sanitation?
So as Devin mentioned, the the regulations or the policy around public-private partnerships is well established. I think it's over 20 years it's been in place. But however, but with the exception perhaps of eThekwini and maybe one or two other examples, we've seen almost no PPPs in water and sanitation in South Africa. And those municipalities that have possibly gone down that path are not encouraged or do not want to do it again. And there's a real hesitancy, I would say, to kind of follow this very formalized and structured approach to PPPs in general. So it has kind of, I think it really has hindered the more active participation of the private sector within sanitation provision. They're generally brought in as a service provider and things like that. So they're procured, either for their particular capital or for the actual services within the sanitation space. But so I think there's a lot of work for innovation there. In terms of who holds the mandate, and yes, you say there's a constitutional right, and it is quite clear within the sanitation policy. Ultimately, it's the sanitation should be provided by the municipality in which the citizens reside. However, there are grey areas, right? And I think that's where things get a little bit more tricky, specifically around occupants of private land. So, for example, a very practical one is farm workers, right? So who's going to provide sanitation on that particular? It doesn't make sense for the municipality to get involved. Is it clear that the farmer himself will possibly need to provide that sanitation? How does it work, etc.? So there are some of those areas that are a bit more tricky. And then, of course, when it comes to informal settlements, it gets even more difficult. So there you have very uncertain tenureship. You have people who've possibly invaded the land. It's not suitable for habitation, and in that case, there's a lot of differing opinions, legal opinions in South Africa as to exactly who is responsible for the provision of services on that land, whether it's water and sanitation, whether it's electricity. And I think there's quite a lot of effort being done now around clarifying that, because I think, it's not 100% clear.
I'll switch it up a little bit and speak about funding. You find that provision of high quality sanitation services is really very, is difficult to fund, and you find that the private sector will come in with efficiencies to reduce the cost. However, in the same breath, especially when it comes to low-income areas, it's difficult to pass the whole cost to the low-income areas, the customers. I would like to kind of speak a bit about that. Claire, how does the constitutional right to water and sanitation affect funding in South Africa?
So because it's a constitutional right, there is an expectation, obviously, that everyone will receive sanitation, whether they can pay for it or not. So we have what's called in South Africa local government equitable share, which is effectively supposed to fund the operating expenditure of sanitation for all the low-income citizens within a particular municipality. Unfortunately, it's quite low. It's about $7 per year per household, it works out to be. So that's obviously, that's not enough. So they need to find within the municipality, you need to obviously cross-subsidize. So you need to bring on, to be able to ensure that your low-income customers are receiving, the services. You need to obviously get the revenue from your wealthier customers. The tricky thing is when thinking about some of the models that have been adopted, say in Kenya and other places, where you've got private sector providers who are able to actually charge for that service, that's very difficult in a South African context, because there is this constitutional right, there is this expectation that the services will be provided for free if you're unable to afford them. So I think it has been quite a hindrance, even within a kind of quite a structured public-private partnership, to be able to think about, okay, well, how do we incentivize the private sector to possibly get involved here when they're not going to make any money necessarily, unless they're subsidized directly by the government.
Are you able to speak about the funding situation at eThekwini, and how do you feel that, where does the funding come from? Do you have any funding challenges, especially when it comes to attracting private sector equity?
Thanks, John. Okay, so from eThekwini municipality, the water and sanitation unit is ring fenced in the sense that it's a trading cluster, it's involved basic services, etc. So it is ring fenced. It does help in the sense that in terms of the budget comprises an allocation of revenue collection, comprises grants, as Claire has mentioned, and loans. So in terms of the budget, there is limitations, obviously. And I mean, just with our successful PPP, Durban Water Recycling, 20 years ago when we implemented it, funding was a barrier and it remains to be a barrier. All right. So certainly from the municipality side, you need to look at some innovative ways of bringing in funding. So in terms of the capital budget, it is limited because it's based on a gearing ratio. So basically, the municipality cannot just borrow; it has to have a moderate gearing ratio. So eThekwini Water and Sanitation, what we've looked at as an alternative vehicle to bringing in funding is through PPPs. So those are off-balance sheet funding, and that's how we were able to implement the Durban Water Recycling Plant. So in terms of PPPs, you need to do a feasibility study. Now, Claire mentioned about why there are not sufficient PPPs, and there's a reason for that, and that's because to embark on a PPP, you need to have the much needed feasibility, or they call it the project prep funding. So this project funding is a detailed feasibility study that's required to embark on a PPP process for rightful reasons, because it is long-term concession contracts that involves ratepayers' money. So in eThekwini, we've come up with an innovative approach where we are able to adopt a reimbursive grant funding that's funded through the development banks, and where it is at no cost to the municipality. Now, these project prep funding ranges from $500,000 to about $1.5 million, depending on the large infrastructure projects like desal projects. So you can imagine a lot of these struggling utilities, it is hard to get this type of funding. And certainly a lot of the projects are there, it's available, but it still sits on the shelf because without this project for funding, you cannot get going. So in terms of the equitable share funding, as Claire mentioned, it is constitutional right. It is something that the municipalities do get on a regular basis. Once the services is supplied, the municipality has to continue with those services. So basically, you do have a level of commitment from the municipality for these grants that come through. However, as Joan mentioned, there is a gap. And how do you bridge that gap? So for me, it's not about the regulation, it's not about the policy there, it's about how do you make these projects sexy. And if you look at I think what Sanergy and Fresh Life has already done, they've done it successfully in the sense that you got to look at, like, for instance, phosphorus. Phosphorus is a depleting worldwide resource, right? And wastewater sludge is now regarded as a new black gold. So that's becoming increasingly valuable resource in future. So for me, it's about how you structure these PPPs to allow the private sector to come in and convert these waste streams to revenue streams. And basically, that's how you bridge the gap. So with our Durban Water Recycling project, as I mentioned, we've gone into a new PPP contract. Now, through the transaction advisory process, we were able to implement a new three kind of, I would say, financial model, in the sense that, one, we're getting a revenue stream from the effluent. Number two, we now got the industrial off-takers providing a revenue, and we have the municipality now being a portable water off-taker. So it's about getting the right transaction advisor with the correct skill set, and you'll be able then to produce innovative models and provide alternative sources of financial models. For instance, with the Durban Water Recycling project, because of the demand reduced over the 20-year concession, the transaction advisor looked at creating a reserve fund to be able then to fund the project viability gap. So those are important things to implement a PPP, and certainly in terms of funding, for me, it's the feasibility study is a critical component to implement a PPP. So as long as you get the project prep funding, you'll be able to implement a PPP through this process. Thank you.
Thanks for that explanation. Zambia is well known for implementing a sanitation levy. I would like to know from Mutale, how does a levy work, and how does it, and we know it's been successful, and how does it promote PPPs?
Thank you very much. Maybe let me start by saying that let's call it a sanitation surcharge, because if you call it a water tax or water levy, it might bring me into problems. But we call it a sanitation surcharge. This is a concept that we have been implementing since 2007. And what has happened is that we allow certain commercial entities who meet a certain threshold to actually put up to 5% of the water bill. That money is collected and is ring-fenced. Yeah, so for you to use that money, you have to actually apply to the regulator, who should approve the project. Yeah, previously we just used to focus on the sewers. Now we have actually added another mandate to commercial entities, that is on-site sanitation. So we revised the sanitation concept so that it could also be used for on-site sanitation activities. So now what you will see more happening now is that we see a situation where we have standards for toilets, but people may not have upfront money to pay. So we want that money also to go towards financing those people may not afford, but we need to recover that money so that it becomes a revolving fund. So that you will see it happening. But also what we have seen is that when Lusaka Water started, getting into partnerships with private operators, we started with emptiers for pit latrines, not septic tanks. So we discovered actually that the cost was quite on the higher side. So we needed to subsidize to attract them. So we are thinking that these funds could also be used as a catalytic fund, but it shouldn't be in perpetuity. You just have to attract, so that once the business grows, then you allow them to move on. But we also see a situation where if we go into zoning, because that's what we are doing now, it will mean that we give each private operator a zone and we ensure that the economies of scale are there. So we mix the pit latrines and septic tanks so that when you do a pricing, you should be able to cover the cost without having any problems. So that is on the sanitation levy. Maybe what I should just mention, maybe I can talk about it later, but what we are trying to do is that for you to utilize it well, you need to come up with what you call financing models for household toilet construction, so that you know how to finance and how to invest and how to get that money from the people. Because if you just give people money, you construct maybe toilets for them. If you don't know how to recover it, then it will no longer be a revolving fund. So we are developing what we are calling financing models. I think we'll be able to conclude anytime soon. The consultant has done a lot of work. So again, that financing model should be able to help us do much more in terms of financing on-site sanitation services using the sanitation surcharge. Thank you very much.
On the same breath, when you're speaking about sanitation surcharge, right? My next question goes to Tom of KIWASCO. The regulator, who we call WASREB, who we have the pleasure and honor of having them in the room, have developed a sanitation guidelines for the levy. Has KIWASCO explored the use of this levy? And what do you think are the other options besides a levy or a surcharge that you are looking towards funding the sanitation sector?
Thank you, Joanne. I know the regulator has come up with guidelines for the sanitation levy. We also have guidelines for sanitation surcharge. The surcharge is for those mostly for industries who don't comply. If you don't comply, then there's a penalty. So that penalty will go to providing NSS solutions. The sanitation levy will be a percentage of the water bill. The proposal currently is 5%, and yes, KIWASCO is in the forefront of piloting the sanitation levy. I think there are 3 utilities that have been earmarked to pilot that. I believe that is going to be a step in the right direction in reducing the financing gap. Of course, internally, we have vacuum trucks, which we collect some revenue that we invest back into providing non-sewered sanitation solutions. For the sewered sanitation, of course, it's a percentage of the water bill, but that is mainly for operations and maintenance. So you see, there is a mix. So the question is this sanitation levy, once we implement it, of course, it's going to be ring-fenced, and the use of that levy is going to be well defined, because I know the regulator will of course be following up on that. Now the other funding mechanisms, of course, we have the private sector, and Fresh Life is one of them. Of course, they do invest some bit of money. We do develop joint proposals to attract funding, and we have been a bit successful in that front. Of course, together with the other partners that we work with when it comes to non-sewered sanitation. We have partners like Sanivation. Of course, we work with WhatsApp also very, very closely. Because of our entry into non-sewered sanitation, we were able to bring together all the responsible people in sanitation in the county. So we have KIWASCO, then we have the county, specifically the public health. We have the county water department, and then we have the city public health as well. Now, through that, we've been able to influence budgetary allocation for sanitation. Of course, we also have quite a bit of donors who have come on board directly to invest in sanitation. We have projects like that being done by like Victoria Basin Commission. The other funding, of course, is from the national government, the big projects where we've taken concessional loans to develop sewer treatment, a new sewer treatment plant, and of course the trunk mains. Now, I want to clarify that for us, of course, in Kenya, we also have the PP Act, which is too complicated for us at this moment because of scale. And I think the South African scale is a bit higher than in Kenya. So we are able to develop tailor-made PPPs at the company level and at the county level. Thank you.
Response. Over to KCCA. And speaking about manual pit emptiers, we understand that you've been able to partner with 2 associations of manual pit emptiers. So we have the Association of Emptiers as well as the Galpa Association of Uganda to formalize the improvement of emptying services. From your experience, what made them a valuable partner, and what challenges did you face when you began the partnerships, and how did you overcome them?
Maybe just to correct, they're not only manual emptiers. We do work with both the mechanized and the manual emptiers, and the Association for Emptiers, cesspool emptiers, and then we also have the Galpas Association, and those are the manual emptiers. And why did we deem them as valuable for us? First of all, Kampala is over 90% of our city dwellers rely on on-site sanitation, and that alone makes us have to work with the different entrepreneurs within this particular sector. And at that time, we used to have many of them working unregulated for decades. So that alone also pushed us to have them come on board as regulators to find a way how that we actually formalize and regulate them. And also we also have an issue. In 2017, we carried out an assessment in Kampala where we mapped out all the sanitation facilities in the city. And one of the things we were looking at was the awareness of emptying services. And it came out that the awareness in terms of what do people know actually what they're supposed to do when the toilets are emptied or who to approach. The awareness was very low, and that alone calls us also to bring on board the different associations and entrepreneurs to support us. And the collection efficiency was very low at that time, at about 44%. So that alone also brought us still to the same business entrepreneurs to work together. And we have seen us as an authority and also them as associations or as growing businesses develop. And we've gone through a whole session for over 3 years, taking them through different capacity building programs, because when we started engaging with them, they actually thought we want to chase them out of the city. Being the capital city, they were not ready to release information. They were not ready to actually cooperate with us. We had to have several engagements, several collaborations with them to make them understand why we actually want to partner with them, to make them understand why do we actually want to bring them on board and work with us, and for us also to show them that we're not actually chasing you out of the city. Instead, we want you to grow your businesses. So all that has we've gone through a lot of working with them, talking to them, and you're going to realize that most of our emptiers are actually very illiterate. So also taking them through different capacity building them programs to see the need for them to actually get on board when it comes to the literacy levels, taking them through health and occupation safety. Most of them were working and they were not protected in terms of their health and also endangering the health of our communities. Many of them had been operating. You ask them, okay, how much is your business making in terms of profits? They actually didn't know. They didn't have records. So we went through lots of capacity building with them, and all these have been opportunities for us to actually get into the hearts of their businesses, and also them coming up to accept us and also work with us. And we have seen many of our emptiers, many of our different entrepreneurs actually growing. We currently have some at an international level. We have the PASA, Pan-African Association for the Emptiers, and we have many of them, 2 of them actually as leaders, and this is through the different capacity building programs that we had with them. But also much as we've registered, and also to add, when we started, most of them, we had actually one company, and it was a cesspool company. That was in 2016. But as we speak today, we have over 60 companies. 32 are for the manual emptiers, fully registered. And also we have about 28 of them who are for the cesspool emptiers, well registered. So still taking them to that level of having them coming on board and registering was also another time for us to actually have engagements with them. And we've also seen them very actively supporting us in terms of removing sludge from the communities. And we have seen this also helping us to improve on our well-managed sludge. And we are currently at 71%. And we've had several challenges, of course, in terms of cost. Still, you're going to find many of our community people not actually able to afford the costs of emptying, and also the capacity for the emptiers is still very low. And we are looking at also getting a revolving fund to see how they can be able to access financing and increase their asset base. And also when it comes to costs, we are currently implementing a subsidy program to see how best we can support the vulnerable urban poor. Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks for that response. Still on the same breath, speaking about PPPs, Tom of KIWASCO, we have signed an MOU between KIWASCO and Fresh Life, and this partnership began in 2017. From your experience, how was the situation in the informal settlements before 2017, and how has the partnership changed the sanitation landscape, especially in the informal settlements?
Yeah, thank you very much, Joanne, once again. Before this partnership, I'd say that there was a lot of disorder in the informal settlements. There was a lot of pollution of the rivers that drain into the lake, and the quality of life in the low-income areas was also pathetic because there was no safe way of disposing the waste. Kisumu is a lakeside city, and therefore the water table is very high. So for the non-sewered sanitation, mostly in the low-income areas, they use pit latrines, not even septic tanks. So because of the high level of the water table, you'd find a situation where a pit latrines gets full, or during the rainy season, it flows into the river. And if it is full, what the landlord will do, or the household will do, is to dig another pit latrine next to this other one and fill. So it's a very pathetic situation. So in terms of our partnership, I think because of the container-based solution that we are providing, it's very appropriate for a city like Kisumu, where the water table is very high. Through the partnership, we are also able to sign agreements with to formalize the manual pit emptiers, and they've grown quite a bit in number. Because we formalize now, we can see that once they empty, and they empty in a hygienic way, because we've trained them, of course, through our partnership with WhatsApp as well. So they empty in a hygienic way and transport, and they bring it to a treatment plant for treatment. Fresh Life also does the same. They empty and bring to our treatment plants for treatment. So that has brought in quite a bit of order, and because of that partnership, we saw that there was also a gap when it comes to public toilets. And we decided to do standard operating procedures for public toilets. And again, we looked around and approached the private sector. And through Sanivation, we were able to develop standard operating procedures for public toilets, something that has been an eye-opener to the public health department of the county. Again, we are seeing a lot of improvement in terms of resource mobilization for non-sewered sanitation solutions through this partnership. As I mentioned earlier, there are certain joint proposals that we've done together, and we have received funding to sort out certain aspects of the sanitation service chain. Again, once you are in partnership, then you realize that it creates, we kind of become a catalyst for the private sector to come and provide sanitation solutions for Kisumu City. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Before we wind down, I think we have about 12 minutes. Are there any questions from the audience? Sorry. Oh, thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Just for the online. Okay. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful panel, and I love the presentations as well. My question is for Julian about the fund for subsidies for households who can't pay. I'm curious, or anyone on the panel could speak to this as well, but what approaches you are thinking about using for targeting those subsidies to the most vulnerable households?
Let's take a few questions and then get responses, I think. Yeah. There's one in the back.
Hi. Really nice presentation discussion. I have two questions, one for Remy and one for Sam from the previous presentation. Remy, do you look at CBS as a stopgap arrangement or a permanent solution for a city? That's for you. And for Sam, in the project, you had a lot of components there. Regulations, PPP, settings. What was the time span? How much time did you spend on the project?
Thank you. Maybe one more from the room? Oh yeah, Andrew? I'll do a softball. Sure.
Awesome panel, Andrew from Sanitation. There's maybe some development partners in the room. What is sort of your pitch to them, when working from the utility landscape of what's needed to really help mobilize public funding to scale up these non-sewered sanitation interventions?
Thanks, Andrew. Maybe we'll start with those and then take others. So I think the first one was to Julian. There you go.
Yes, how we targeting? First of all, Kampala has we did an assessment, and we have different zones that are actually very vulnerable, and we call them the red zones. So those are areas which are usually affected by cholera. Whenever it rains, there are lots of cholera outbreaks, which we've not had for some time now. So those are the first priorities. As we carry out our subsidies, those are the areas that we start with, just in case, because most of them have the very vulnerable. And still, we also have a criteria that we follow as we give out these subsidies. We have a criteria looking at who is the poor, looking at the poorest of the poor. You're going to find that one who actually can't afford to even pay for a subsidy. So we target those ones, giving them reliefs. And the institution actually caters for this. Then you're having those others that can actually pay a small portion, and these are still within those red zones. So we have a criteria that we follow, and we also look at the gender. We're also incorporating gender. We're having very many women-headed households. So those are some also of our focus areas of focus as we carry out or as we give out these subsidies to our communities in Kampala. Yes.
Thanks, Julian. I think Remy, you were next.
Thank you. So is CBS temporary or permanent? Both, because the way I know it, and most people know it, is that it's appropriate for informal settlements, dense areas, which are temporary. I mean, according to any city master plan, informal settlements will have ceased to exist in about 10, 15, maybe 20 years. So at that point, maybe we don't need them. And why not? If there's no informal settlements, I'm happy. It depends if you believe them or not. This being said, I've been pleasantly surprised since joining the CBS Alliance to see that they are used in events, on construction sites, on camping sites, on as public toilets, in schools, in low, medium and high income countries. So they have proven to be useful in a wider variety of contexts than I thought. So including in less dense areas. So I think I'm willing to be surprised by how well it's going to be used on what we're going to take from it. For example, the reuse of products, etc., that is made available by it.
Thank you, Remy. Sam?
Yeah, great. And thank you for the question. It's a really good question in terms of highlighting how long this takes. So when you talk about the different elements involved, so Omar was speaking to those in terms of Mozambique, the regulatory framework that AUDA IP, formerly CRA, has been developing, that's been in process for at least 8 years, something of that magnitude. The sanitation tariff as one response to bridging the financing gap, similar, maybe even longer. That's now been approved into law in Mozambique, but it's still actually to be implemented. So all of these processes really take a long time. From WASHUP's perspective, that's why it's critically important to establish those long-term relationships, but we're still not really at the end game in terms of those wider improvements to the enabling environment. And then in terms of sweep, so that PPP was first established in Dhaka around 6 years ago. And we've then replicated that in Chattogram and Rangpur, so it's active in 3 cities in Bangladesh. And of course, there are a lot of variables then in terms of how far you can extend that. And there's financing coming into the sector now in Bangladesh from the DPHE, the Department of Public Health Engineering, and World Bank, which is supporting improvements across municipalities. Thank you. Maybe I need to repeat that for the audience online, but you haven't missed out. Yes, so we're now at a position where we could potentially support a rollout of a light touch model of that PPP across multiple municipalities in Bangladesh. But that, again, you're looking at a 6-year time frame, and it's only because of wider financing that's coming into the sector that we're now able to scale that up. So bottom line, this takes really a long time, as I think has been reflected in the contributions of the panelists as well.
Thanks, Sam. I don't know if anyone on the panel wanted to take Andrew's question. Yeah.
Just in terms of the PPP timeline, yeah. So there's a perception, especially in South Africa, that PPPs take a long time. It's a very onerous process, etc. But being in eThekwini and having registered the most number of PPPs, we've come up with a system where we can fast track some of the processes. So yes, in South Africa, we've got a robust PPP framework, and we've got a GTAC unit that is very well equipped and competent to provide these services. So what we've done, we basically got in MOGA and MOPA agreements. So these are agreements with the National Treasury PPP unit, where we are able to allow them to undertake certain services for us. To just give you an example, we just appointed a transaction advisor for our reuse project. Instead of the municipality going through its procurement system, which could take between 9 and 12 months, we were able to do that in 1 month, simply because there's a dedicated team for PPPs. So certainly, yes, there is innovative ways to actually shorten that time span. Thank you.
Did you want to comment? Yes,
Yeah, just maybe to make a comment on the issues of subsidies. I think we all know that subsidies are not sustainable. I think that issue has to be very clear, that subsidies are not sustainable. So when I was talking about emptying pit latrines, we know that we needed to attract the private operators. But going forward, we need to do the zoning so that you look at economies of scale. So that when you give a zone to a particular emptier, even when it's very expensive, and the tariff would be able to normalize, so that I think it's more sustainable. I just wanted to emphasize on the fact that when we talk about subsidies, I think it's not something that we should really continue talking about, but we need to find solutions to ensure that we have sustainable, arrangements. Yeah, those are just my comments. Thank you.
So if I may just comment back on this, I understand why you're saying this, because that's the mantra that we hear a lot, subsidies that are unsustainable. Let's just remember that many rich countries that have achieved full sanitation have subsidized sanitation for a long time. Some continue to do so. You take an example that is not from the 19th century, but more recently South Korea, which has moved from, 30% to 100% safe sanitation. I think they're managing to recover the costs for water. I'm not sure if they have managed yet for sanitation more than 50 years after. It is subsidized, effectively. So when there are funders from which countries saying, oh, that's not sustainable, I think we should tell the truth to them a bit. Thank you.
Any other comments from the panel? I think we have maybe time for one more question. Okay.
Thank you. Just a quick question I'm not sure if it's to Fresh Life or CBSA, but I was just wondering, how have you been able to shift the perception, if any, on behavioral aspects, the social side of things? So you have the technology, but how have you been able to, have such great success with uptake?
Thank you. Who wants to? Yes.
I think the first thing is when you look at what is the alternative, because a lot of the places where we've actually implemented container-based sanitation is where you actually find that there's actually no toilet. So when you compare that to what we are offering, then automatically it becomes something that is easy to take up. Yes, and then the challenges that we found in terms of the environment, in terms of the regulation, the informal settlements that we spoke about, where it's not permanent, tomorrow they come, it's destroyed, they've moved out. With all those challenges, then we find that it's actually much, much easier to take up. Yeah. But the biggest selling point for the container-based sanitation is the fact that in most of the places where we've put it up, there was actually no toilet at all. Yeah.
When we introduced the Fresh Life toilets in Kisumu city there was quite a bit of resistance because of perception. Not only the resistance didn't come from the users, but from very senior people, some of them in civil society. And they're saying that we know Kisumu people are a very proud people. They're not going to tolerate carrying shit in buckets. But once we implemented, I mean, the story is different. So it's been really accepted. Thank you.
I think that brings us to the end of our session. We're really grateful for all the presenters, the panelists, as well as everyone present online as well as in person. And we're looking forward to seeing you next year again. Thank you.